Very often when we have arguments, all we're actually doing is shouting past each other. And this is not really the most productive use of our time. I'm Colin Wright, and you are watching Consider This. Unfortunately, when most of us enter a discussion or an argument, we are not entering it to be convinced of anything. We are entering it to convince the other person of something, or failing that, to make them feel bad about the choice that they've made so that we can feel superior about the choice that we have made. And all this tends to do is reinforce one's own party affiliation, whatever that party happens to be, and it increases the instances of othering, of creating an outside group that is not part of your group, and as a result increases the amount of conflict and the degree of that conflict. And it doesn't even really convince the other person of anything except perhaps that you are a jerk. Now, the alternative to this is to have a real discussion where people on both sides are equally likely to change their mind about something that's presented. And I like to call these productive arguments. And the difference here is that you're not entering the discussion just to try to convince the other person of something. You are actually entering with the real possibility that you will be convinced of something. You are entering it with an open mind, and you're going to present your side the best that you can, but you're also going in with the intent, first and foremost, of learning something. Now, you might notice that that is a substantially different approach than a lot of people take to arguments. And in order to make a productive argument actually work, it requires a couple of things, and they are not easy things to apply and hold to. The first is that you cannot use any labels, and you can't use them, you can't even imply labels, because labels are inherently reductive. And so as a result, if you apply a label to something that somebody has said, or if you yourself call somebody else a certain title that implies that they're a part of a group, you've taken their entire side of the argument and reduced it down to this lowest common denominator, using a bunch of attributes or applying a bunch of attributes that may or may not actually apply to them, but by default applying it to them because they are now part of this group. An example of this is if somebody says that they are for a minimum basic income, or if somebody says that they want universal health care, to call them a socialist or to call them a communist. That is inherently reductive, and it may not agree with anything else that they believe in, and they may not agree with 99% of what those terms typically imply. But as a result, you have reduced this argument down to an argument between labels. This is not productive, this can be offensive, and this is something that keeps you from learning anything new because you've already decided who this other person is. And anything that they say from that point forward will be filtered through that lens of you having decided that they are part of this other group. And the flip of that, of course, is that they will do the same to you. If they apply a label to you, everything that you say will be filtered through this particular lens. If you say that you want there to be harsher regulations on immigration, and they call you a fascist or anti-immigrant or a racist, then everything that you say will be filtered through that. And that may or may not actually be fair. You may or may not actually agree with any of the other statements or positions that agree with those labels. But if you do not enter into a discussion or an argument with good faith, then you cannot avoid that. It's unavoidable, this type of reductionism. And so avoiding labels is a really, really great starting point for a productive argument, because then you actually have to discuss and base your opinions and talking points on what's actually there, what you both actually think about a given topic, as opposed to using these shortcut terms that end up flattening the entire discussion. It's also incredibly important to ask a lot of questions without leveling any moral judgments. And what I mean by this is that instead of saying, "Oh, you believe this? How can you possibly believe this? Blah, 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 blah." Instead, try to be as unbiased as possible and try to allow that to be reflected in your voice and your intonation and in the question itself. So if somebody says that they're voting for a different political party than you don't say, "How can you do that? They're all monsters and they are this and they are that, and therefore as a result you are this and you are that." Instead you say, "Oh, okay, well, they believe this about immigration, I think. How do you feel about immigration? What are your thoughts on this? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so what about this? What about this situation? And what about this particular subset of that question? What about this very specific point? The idea is that rather than using questions as a weapon, as a way of trying to force this person to admit something that renders their entire argument null and void and moot, you instead use these questions the way that they're intended, to try to explore, to try to ask questions. The end point here that you're trying to reach is to be able to fully understand the point that they're making, and ideally, to be able to make that point back at them, as well or better than them. And so you understand their point of view so well that you could very accurately and precisely explain their point of view back to them. Only then are you capable of truly making a complete argument against them if you still continue to believe the opposite. But ideally, what you've done by using questions in this way and refusing to flatten the conversation by leveling labels on the other person, you've also empathized a bit. So rather than just blanket disagreeing with them or having a different standpoint, you recognize the validity of their standpoint from their point of view, and as a result are better able to then fit that point of view into your own worldview. The idea here is not to win. You do not win a productive argument by trying to make the other person feel foolish or trying to convince them of your dogma. The way that you win is by rounding out your worldview and helping them to do the same so that you both have a better understanding of these different points of view, and then as a result can both make better decisions about your own opinions. It is remarkable how far you can go with these types of nested questions and how difficult it is to try to maintain these types of standards, to try to not use labels, to try to not scoff or scowl or shake your head condescendingly. It's so difficult not to condescend in this type of conversation because we're so accustomed to doing it. We are so accustomed to entering these types of discussions with the intent of showing the inherent superiority of our own point of view. And so entering a discussion, entering a productive argument with the intention of growing as individuals and helping the other person grow as well is a radically different approach. But it's also something that tends to be a whole lot more practical. It's something that allows both people to walk away better, having won, as opposed to both people walking away feeling angry at each other and probably more tribalistic, more dismissive of your point of view than they were before they entered the discussion. There are a few people in my life who I consistently have these types of discussions with, and it's always very educational, and after years of doing it, it's still incredibly difficult. And one variation that I recommend, particularly if you really want to make this a regular thing, and if you find that it's difficult to adhere to these rules of not using labels and of asking very deliberate, non-judgmental questions, is that you use the swear jar variation of it, where if you find yourself doing one of these things, using a label to describe something or asking a very guided, judgmental question, that you put $1 in a jar. And then the idea is that at the end of this discussion, you take that money and you go buy each other drinks. That way, the intention is that you're staying friends and that you're going to continue the discussion in a more casual way later, maybe. But it also supports the idea that you are both here to learn. You're both here to share something and to grow together rather than to stand in opposition of each other. And I think at the end of the day, if we can have more of that type of discussion, more of that type of argument, we wouldn't find ourselves on opposite sides of these very thick lines that we draw in the sand quite so often. We can benefit from our many different points of view rather than suffering from the tribalism that is the result of them. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a like or a share would be amazing. You can also leave a comment in the section below to say hello or to ask me a question that I might answer in a future video. If you'd like to find out more about me or my work, you can go to colin.io. My podcast is at letsknowthings.com. And my blog is exilelifestyle.com. You can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet at Colin is my name, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram. I'm all over the place. Feel free to reach out and say hello. Thanks for watching.